In the late 1750s, Adams fell in love with Hannah Quincy. While they were alone, he was poised to propose but was interrupted by friends, and the moment was lost. In 1759, he met 15-year-old Abigail Smith, his third cousin, through his friend Richard Cranch, who was courting Abigail's older sister. Adams initially was not impressed with Abigail and her two sisters, writing that they were not fond, nor frank, nor candid. In time, he grew close to Abigail and they were married on October 25, 1764, despite the opposition of Abigail's mother. They shared a love of books and kindred personalities and proved honest in their praise and criticism of each other. After his father's death in 1761, Adams had inherited a 9+1/2 acre, 3.8 hectares, farm and a house where they lived until 1783. John and Abigail had 6 children. Abigail, Nabby, in 1765, future President John Quincy Adams in 1767, Susanna in 1768, Charles in 1770, Thomas in 1772, and Elizabeth in 1777. Susanna died when she was 1 year old, while Elizabeth was stillborn. All 3 of his sons became lawyers. Charles and Thomas were unsuccessful, became alcoholics, and died before old age, while John Quincy excelled and launched a career in politics. Adams's writings are devoid of his feelings about the sons' fates. Opponent of Stamp Act, Adams rose to prominence leading widespread opposition to the Stamp Act of 1765. The act was imposed by the British Parliament without consulting the American legislatures. It required payment of a direct tax by the colonies for stamped documents, and was designed to pay for the costs of Britain's war with France. Power of enforcement was given to British Vice-Admiralty courts, rather than common law courts. These Admiralty courts acted without juries and were greatly disliked. The act was despised for both its monetary cost and implementation without colonial consent, and encountered violent resistance, preventing its enforcement. Adams authored the Braintree Instructions in 1765, in the form of a letter sent to the representatives of Braintree in the Massachusetts legislature. In it, he explained that the act should be opposed since it denied 2 fundamental rights guaranteed to all Englishmen, and which all free men deserved, rights to be taxed only by consent and to be tried by a jury of one's peers. The instructions were a succinct and forthright defense of colonial rights and liberties, and served as a model for other towns' instructions. Adams also reprised his pen name, Humphrey Plowjogger, in opposition to the Stamp Act in August of that year. Included were 4 articles to the Boston Gazette. The articles were republished in the London Chronicle in 1768 as True Sentiments of America, also known as a dissertation on the canon and feudal law. He also spoke in December before the Governor and Council, pronouncing the Stamp Act invalid in the absence of Massachusetts representation at Parliament. He noted that many protests were sparked by a popular sermon of Boston minister Jonathan Mayhew, invoking Romans chapter 13 to justify insurrection. While Adams took a strong stand against the act in writing, he rebuffed attempts by Samuel Adams, a leader in the popular protest movements, to involve him in mob actions and public demonstrations. In 1766, a town meeting of Braintree elected Adams as a selectman. With the repeal of the Stamp Act in early 1766, tensions with Britain temporarily eased. Putting politics aside, Adams moved his family to Boston in April 1768 to focus on his law practice. The family rented a clapboard house on Brattle Street that was known locally as the White House. He, Abigail, and the children lived there for a year, then moved to Cold Lane. Still, later, they moved again to a larger house in Brattle Square in the center of the city. In 1768, Adams successfully defended the merchant John Hancock, who was accused of violating British Acts of Trade in the Liberty Affair. With the death of Jeremiah Gridley and the mental collapse of Otis, Adams became Boston's most prominent lawyer. Counsel for the British, Boston Massacre.